Hi guys, welcome back to PureLunacy. Thank you for joining me again. This is my wonderful friend Rick. Rick is a Dallasite. He is founder, CEO of Ash and Lime, has a master's in urban planning, great mind, even better humor. Clearly, he had me laughing right before we started.
I did.
So say hello, Rick. Introduce yourself to the world of PureLunacy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick. I'm proud to be here at PureLunacy.
Yes. Yes. Now, I invited Rick because we always have interesting conversations. Oh, he's social distancing in the office. We always have interesting conversations about our communities, and you have a lot of experience when it comes to urban planning, creating urban spaces and design, and you're also somebody with great opinions when it comes to current events. How are you doing? How are things going for you in your realm of the world?
Well, I think this is a difficult time for everybody, certainly. I'm fortunate in the sense that it helps my morale because I know that I can do some things to help in this situation. We are a small urban planning firm. We work on the downtown scale and the neighborhood scale. And, a lot of the things that we've really been pushing for a long time, that we thought were good ideas for a long time, seem especially like good ideas now. In other words, for example,
what?
the typical way that urban planning is done, for example, you kind of have a lot of times some plans that cost a lot of money. They don't really have a lot of meaningful input from people. They don't really have a lot of real on-the-ground experience behind them. And they have a lot of things that they kind of sit on the shelf because they're not really meant to be implemented as soon as possible. Or a lot of the times when we look at economic development, there's kind of that saying about smokestack chasing, where you'll pay a lot of money to try to get the factories or the warehouses to come in on the fringes of town, but the companies that are actually there, the small businesses, for example, don't get a lot of love.
Right.
2 months ago, that was a really bad policy, but now it's even worse. If you're ignoring all the small businesses that are going out of business and focusing on trying to bribe somebody to come in for a dubious return on investment, it's a really bad idea. And there's a lot of really good ideas that involve fine-grained focus on details, that involve really trying to go on the ground and figure out what your next steps are, that involve figuring out how we can start having events that can keep the public as safe as possible, how we can start engaging people. I always thought it was a good idea to engage people in a lot of very small groups. Now it happens to be that
reality.
It's the reality, and it's a public safety issue. So there's a lot of things that were good ideas before that are really good ideas now, more than ever. And I feel like we're in a good position to help with that. It's social distancing, and certainly is hard for me personally, as I'm sure it is with a lot of people. I'm fortunate enough to have a little private office that I can go to. It used to be 4 people here, but now it's somewhere where I can go, and that at least helps. But it's a difficult time for all of us, I think, and I'm just focused on figuring out how we can help communities. I've retooled a lot of the way that I think about my business. That I want to
just a side note, you're considered a small business owner.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner. How is it affecting you and your business, and how are you reimagining how you can move forward in your industry?
Excuse me. First of all, I'm very conscious when I cough now. So
cough into your elbow, not into
I
your
know
mouth.
I should do that. I'll wash this hand, I promise. Well, it's one of those things where our most typical clients are either developers or cities. And there's a lot of cities that see right now that they need to do things differently. Budgets are smaller, and it's hard to make a decision right now. So we have existing clients, and we have a lot more that are in the pipeline, but it's just a slow process right now. We are able to be confident, I think, because first of all, I've had a small business for a long time. We have basically 3 employees plus myself, 3 or 4, depending on how you're counting it, plus myself. Right. We've been doing this for a long time. We have really good relationships, and I know how much value we bring to the table. But it's still, it's a hard time because you want to be able to have, you want to be able to make sure that you have the client base. One of the things I think that makes me feel better is because I really do not feel like I want a huge amount of clients right now. Mm-hmm. I feel like we can't bite off everything. You can't help everybody.
One bite at a time.
Yeah, you got to do one bite at a time. That's how you eat an elephant, right? And Rome wasn't built in a day. That's something that we tell our clients because it's timeless wisdom. We're big advocates of this idea called incrementalism, which is just take one step at a time, figure out what the next thing you can do is. And a lot of people, when they hear incrementalism, they hear small. They think of it as just small things. Or two, yeah. Even though
we live in a McDonald's world, we want everything now.
But the saying Rome wasn't built in a day is very telling, because you wouldn't have a Rome if you tried to build it all at once with a big gap. Exactly. It had to be, there was certainly elements of grandiosity, to say the least, but the foundation is one step at a time, and that's how all of these things work. And so we want to just work with a small number of communities that get it. We want to work with city leaders who understand that the way that they've been doing things isn't sustainable, and we want to just do a good job with them. I
think that that's going to be key when it comes to Texas, because what we've seen in our communities is just exponential growth. A lot of people moving really fast, and nobody's taking the time to just take a step back and to just review and look and evaluate whether it's the correct path that we're taking. And yes, this coronavirus is a horrible thing, but it does provide, I think, a lot of opportunities for urban development, for urban planning to come in and to truly and incrementally put in changes that will be of benefit for the community. So, I mean, I think we're watching history before our eyes, not just in terms of a crisis, but in terms of an evolutionary period in our American communities.
Right.
So, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't say that nobody predicted a pandemic, but I certainly wasn't sitting around thinking, gosh, a pandemic is probably going to come soon. But what's being revealed is really the fragility of a lot of our systems, and that was apparent before, or should have been.
To the people who were paying attention, I think, to everyday person who's just looking to put food on their table or roof over their heads, it's not priority number one.
Right. But you look at, the example of the way that we've had our cities operate. I gave the example of these economic development policies. Mm-hmm. And before we were talking, I know that you have a connection, to the Bishop Arts neighborhood yourself.
Yeah.
I live near that neighborhood, and it was very clear to me, for example, for a long time, that there were a lot of things that would not have been expensive in the big scheme of things that the city could have been doing. That would be a lot less expensive than kind of the subsidies that went, to essentially the developments and things like that. And the neighborhood has been caught flat-footed and without the basic resources it needs, because you didn't have that. If this neighborhood had a Main Street manager and a social media budget, and before certainly an event budget and some type of resources to coach small businesses, we would be probably barely skipping a beat right now. I mean, it would be pretty smooth preparation to reopen.
And I mean, I would say also, I think that we have a lot of different amenities in our cities that they don't necessarily connect. So, for example, small business assistants, why aren't they being connected to the Small Business Development Center that's right down the street, or at Bill J. Priest? Why aren't we connecting the dots so that all the amenities we do have create a safety net so that when a crisis does come, we're ready?
Right.
And like we both have said, nobody was really prepared or ready for what we have now.
Right. And being prepared for an emergency is also being prepared for minor curveballs in life. So usually the things that prepare you for an emergency, prepare you for everything. If you have a very good, backpack that's like a first aid kit, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can prepare you for something, disastrous or apocalyptic. But you know what? You're gonna need some Tylenol at some point. You might need some eye wash at some point. You might. There's a lot of things in that bag that you might need. And so the things that make sense, that are a safety net for an emergency, it's just plain resilience. And we're seeing right now so many levels of unresilience. I mean, who would have thought that our supply chain couldn't
fall apart?
It's
literally falling apart.
Couldn't produce toilet paper in anything like a timely manner. I mean, okay, so you don't have it for a week. I mean, you think of it like, well, you've got.
You're gonna have to go European and use bidets.
Yeah, well, it's just that you would think that we would be able to compensate. You would think that we'd be able to figure out how to get things manufactured and sent. And you don't have hand sanitizers. You're pushing 2 months that you can't purchase hand sanitizers.
Or Lysol or Clorox. Yeah.
And it's like we have Walmart.
But I will say part of the problem is because of the fact that we've shipped the majority of our manufacturing overseas.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest kinks in our whole system, is that we used to have a foundation where even if we did have some manufacturing overseas, we had a safe, stable foundation of manufacturing and business here in America, that if the world went to hell, we could sustain ourselves. And right now we don't have that. And I think it's a big wake-up call to Americans that we need to bring some of that back. Even if it is, a few more cents costlier, that's fine. We'll pay it because we know that the value long-term is there, especially when there's a crisis.
Well, and then sometimes resiliency is can be the opposite, and at least maybe not the opposite, but it's certainly you lose some efficiency when you have resiliency. You have duplication of some things. You have redundancies. And it may be that purchasing everything from countries like China might be very efficient if everything goes right. But if you have no backup, and anybody could have anticipated that at some point something could go wrong. It's just like when you don't have trains going between cities and everything is dependent upon highways. Let's say all of a sudden we get into an oil crisis. Like there's a lot of different types of crises that we could get into. This just happens to be one of them.
Yeah.
And so it was very, there's nothing surprising to me about the fact that this system is very fragile. And that, in my opinion, we have to build this resiliency that we have to build has to be on a very local level.
Absolutely. Yes. Preach.
Yes, yes. So, I prefer to work on the, generally speaking, on the sort of the district, like a downtown district neighborhood corridor scale.
And you've worked with a lot of small towns, not just
I have.
big towns. You've worked with a lot of small towns, and I don't think that people realize the value of small towns and the value that they bring to a greater scale or a greater network within a state, and how much they do contribute. Because a lot of people discredit, oh, it's a small town, oh, they don't have anything. I don't know. I think that what we're going to see is a lot of people are going to be living out further from central cities, and we're going to start to see the value come back into small towns that have a good, healthy central unit, and the community is definitely going to be coming back together to what we used to see, maybe even the, 60s, 50s of America.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is going to create necessarily a long-term trend towards more decentralization of our cities.
You think so? I'm
not sure that it will.
I think there will. I think there's going to be a influx or a deflux of people out of big cities, especially like New York, Los Angeles, big cities where there was very tight crunch. I think you're going to start to see families just kind of leave. They're going to be like, I need air and space.
Right. Well, so I think that the city most affected by this long term is going to be New York.
Yeah.
But I could also remind you, New York has been through multiple major crises, in recent decades. I think any reasonable person might have thought after September 11th that New York would go in a very negative direction. They also were the apex of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. They also almost went bankrupt back in the 70s. But
led to the New York of the 80s.
yeah. So I think it's different, and I think that there are some specific dynamics there, and that's a place that got very hit. Certainly, other places where you're under very cramped conditions. I mean, if you're in San Francisco right now, even though it didn't get hit very hard, you're probably, there's a lot of people who are probably like, maybe I don't like paying, $3,000 a month to have two roommates who I'm stuck with.
To live in a closet.
For several months, yeah. But I would say, even having spent more than half my life in Chicago, which is not as expensive a place as those cities, it's probably not as intolerable even there. So I think
it is cold.
But I think that yes, there's a handful of cities that are aberrations. There are some people who are going to respond in a certain way to this. And by the way, we don't. We're still earlier in the marathon than everybody would like to think. I think that we are. So who knows?
I still think that there's going to be a second wave in the fall. I think things are going to slow down summer. We're going to have time to enjoy a little bit of sun and then get back inside.
We'll see. There's enough about this that I don't understand that I'm not necessarily going to really predict what exactly is the trajectory of this virus. There's a lot about it that doesn't. It's just beyond my ability to assess or analyze. And I choose to spend more of my energy on the part about helping communities recover from this than trying to figure the disease out itself. But because I don't.
Well, let the scientists do that.
Yeah, well, and I'm not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying that the. I think that there's a certain level to which it's, anybody who wants to participate in our democracy needs to try to have some understanding of it. I don't think that that's something that can be handed off to scientists, and I don't think this is a decision that just the scientists should make. But I've tried to give it an honest look. It's just that the data doesn't come through to me the way that it doesn't. I mean,
It's all over the place. That's
as of a week ago, or so, or 10 days ago, I don't know what it is now, but Taiwan had 10 cases, like 10 deaths. Like that doesn't, nobody's given me an explanation for that. In New York, in Manhattan itself, the most cases per capita are in Queens, which is the fourth densest borough. I mean,
I just don't feel like we're getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth when it comes to the data that's being put out there from other countries and even our own. I think that, and I don't know if it's because we lack the data, if it's because we're just pushing out what we have right now, and what we have right now hasn't been adequately reviewed and peer reviewed and ensured that it is correct data.
right.
I just think that we're just getting like almost like word vomit sort of information when it comes to data and information, that I just kind of take it, as it comes. And you almost can't take it as the cold hard truth, but you can't deny it either. You have to just take it for what it is, and keep moving along.
Right. No, and I don't think, and I have a great deal of frustration in the fact that I think that we're not, that people are very resistant to having any conversations about this, especially, I've said things where I've said, like, I know, like, this is probably exactly what I deserve for getting into a discussion on Facebook, but I did a discussion on Facebook where I said like 6 times, like, basically, we don't know what's going to happen here, and just had someone respond to me like, you just have this ideology because you want to go out and do whatever you want and don't care about I'm like, I just said I don't know.
Yeah.
I just said I don't know, and I said that there's various possibilities. I mean, I don't think we can project this, I should say. And ultimately, I mean, it's something that I look at, but I feel like nobody is going to look to me for advice on how we handle this medically, but places will look to me for advice on and pay me for advice, right, on what our strategy is to actually get through this. Yeah. So, what I've focused on is thinking of what type of resources these businesses need, and not only the mom and pops, which pull way past their weight in terms of the social, cultural, and economic value that they create, but even bigger than that. And the second thing that I'm really focused on is how can we think of all of these elements of planning while maintaining social distancing, right? And how can we think of a spectrum of it? Because social distancing it's not binary. It's a spectrum. So what I'm helping my clients do is actually plan for events that give future flexibility, and that include a lot of people into it, that include a variety of people into it, in at least some manner. So, because you start to think, okay, if somebody has major immune issues, or, people who are over a certain age, a lot of them are going to say, I'm not leaving my house until this is over.
And I don't think it'll ever be over, really.
Well, there's
they may create a vaccine, but
I mean,
it's out there. Once the virus is out there, it's out there.
It's out there. There may be a vaccine. It also this may kind of. I don't know exactly what's possible, but I certainly think that the virus will still exist. It's just a matter of how dangerous it's going to be.
Right.
And so to me, what I start to think about, because we're having a lot of talk about reopening the economy, and how you do that safely.
And I'll pause real quick, and I think that there's a lot of people who react the same way like the commenter for you reacted whenever we say reopen the economy, and they feel like it's an affront to the health and the safety of everyone to even discuss the topic. But I think that it's necessary to have the conversation to at least, attempt to resolve this big issue that's affecting literally every single person's life right now as we speak.
I mean,
you
yeah.
can't not have the conversation and
Yeah.
attempt to resolve it.
Well, I mean, I think that at best, if somebody really doesn't think that we need to have a meaningful conversation about the economy now, they're either not really thinking through it, or they're coming from an extraordinary position of privilege. I mean, I've had a face-to-face conversation with somebody who was saying, like, well, this is only money, and it's like, what do you think is going to happen if people don't have money for 6 months? And it's like, well, they can, they'll be able to make money later. It's like, no, you're not going to be able to.
How do you put
to
food
feed
on
your kid?
How do you have a roof over your head?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we have to think about the economy, and we have to think about how we can do it as safely as possible. And we have almost this ideological divide where we're having conversations as if there's one group of people who are concerned about human health and safety, and another who's concerned about the economy, and obviously.
But I think it's important to note that one does not cancel the other.
No,
you can have concern for health and safety, and you can have concern for the economy and people's jobs, and they can correlate.
Right.
They are adjacent to each other. One does not negate the other.
Of course, and there's I mean, and there's always, like, we have to figure out balances, and we also have to we have to be open to different types of policies, and just there's not a lot of easy answers. Yeah. There's not a lot of insurance that what we're doing is the right one. It's like we don't know if what we're doing is right. We're just trying to figure out how to do our best and how to make this as sustainable as possible. But now, to my perspective, if we think about kind of the pyramid of human needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy, and on the very bottom is your basic, like, survival. So and that's coming out, not only you don't want to get sick of a disease that might kill you, but there's also people who they don't have food security right now. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. And that's one set of concerns. And if you go above that, you have kind of your larger security concerns. So am I going to be able to pay my rent? Am I going to be able to have a job? Is this going to wipe me out? But as you kind of go up that pyramid, you have these social concerns. You have the need to connect, and that's very important, especially
mental health.
Yeah, your mental health. And you have, I mean, we're seeing phenomena like massive increases in overdoses right now.
Yeah.
We haven't seen an increase in suicides, fortunately. But there
domestic
may be
abuse, child
certainly
abuse.
Domestic abuse, certainly child abuse, certainly depression, certainly obesity, certainly alcoholism. And you're seeing a lot of very negative things, and this crisis is hitting all up and down this pyramid. Yeah. So and that's getting missed because we're dealing with the bottom two rungs of the pyramid, which are most urgent. So we're not thinking a lot about, hey, what happens to somebody if they don't have contact with another human being for 3 months?
And I think it's important to also put in the fact that in our society, having human contact is part of our norm, and it's part of our needed daily dosage of communication interaction. I mean, if we're talking to somebody who lives out in the boonies in Alaska, having no human contact, they're good with it. They're talking to the wolves,
Right.
and they're fine. But in today's modern setting, having that human contact is a big factor of a healthy setting, a healthy society, a healthy life. And to negate that, I think, is going to be a big factor in people's mental health and how people interact after this.
Well, and I don't think there's a whole lot of people in any culture who don't need other human contact. I mean, there's some,
Unless they
but
live in Siberia.
yeah, I mean, and but even even people generally who live in Siberia, I mean,
They have this small little
you have a small group. I mean, I think it's very rare. There's people who are loners, but it's very rare that someone, no matter how introverted they are, is going to not need to have direct human contact for months. And so to me, I'm thinking a lot about, okay, so how do we think about public space now? And not with one, there's not one answer. There's a multitude of answers.
Yes.
There's a range of possibilities. What if we get tighter? What if we get loosened? And then there's a range of people. So
Right.
you have some people who are going to be, who you're probably going to have to try to slow their roll, who are going to disrespect the rules of decorum. You have people on the other side of the spectrum who maybe not even out of necessity, but out of choice, are going to deeply isolate themselves. And what did you say?
Become recluse.
Become reclusive. And so how do you involve all of them? And we have one of the things that this country has been way ahead of most of the world in, way ahead, is disability laws. The Americans with Disability Act was passed in 1990. My whole life, I assumed, well, probably in Canada and in Europe, or in Australia, I think in Australia they did, but I assumed that other Western countries probably passed something similar, just before or just after. I mean, a lot of them still haven't. We're way ahead, and that's a lot of credit to us, because we as a society decided that we wanted to include, be able to include somebody who might be in a wheelchair or something like that. I mean, it would be nice if we had the same regard for people who might not be able to drive a car, but that's neither here nor there.
Uber?
Yeah, I think it's just like an Uber.
That's the only option right now, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, but we, but now we're facing a situation where, if people are even above a certain age, even if they're perfectly healthy, that becomes a de facto disability right now. Yeah. If you're 75, no matter how healthy you are, you basically have a disability right now for all intents and purposes, because you can't really comfortably be around other people. So how do we think about that? How do we do meaningful work that symbolizes hope? How do we start to not only support businesses, but maybe re-incubate businesses? And how do we do that safely? And one of the things I think that we need to think about. So we're kind of creating this spectrum of physical distancing instead of thinking of it as social distancing. We actually just published something about it on the website. We're about to send it out to people.
Ashline.com.
Yeah, Ashline. Ashline. And those are the ingredients of Roman concrete. But when I want to make sure people understand what I'm saying, I just say ash, like the ash of a cigarette, lime like the fruit. Ashline.com. But really, those are simple ingredients. That's how they made Roman concrete. These are very simple ingredients that have stood the test of time in creating lasting places. So that's the name of the company.
And that's what we're trying to do now.
That's what we're trying to do, and this is timeless stuff.
Yes.
This is timeless stuff. We don't have any wisdom better than this. If I could do enough homework to educate myself enough to be smarter than the things that we've been doing for 7,000 years, I promise I would. I'm not that smart.
You're pretty smart though.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not a dummy, but I'm not smarter than 7,000 years of accrued wisdom made through trial and error. So we're, these are timeless things that we are not smarter than, and we, even in our richest of times, we've never been so wealthy that we could ignore it. There's a lot of billion-dollar-ish stadiums and investments where we said, surely if we pour $1 billion into this, we're going to have a place that people love. And when we didn't focus on those principles, what we created was a place that people hate. Go hang out outside a typical convention center that the city spent hundreds of millions of dollars in at night, and it's a worse place. It's a worse place than what they had before. It's worse than what they tore down. I mean, it creates some value for the city, but it's certainly, unless they paid attention to the fine-grained details of the human experience, it's not going to create a good experience. Our office in Dallas, downtown Dallas, is on Market and Commerce Street. Okay, we're a few blocks away from the big fancy Omni Hotel that's that's owned by the city and things like that, right? And it's like, oh, we're gonna have this big convention center, we're gonna have this big Omni Hotel, it'll help to support the downtown. Okay, nobody who doesn't know what they're doing, right? Especially anybody who might feel vulnerable walking around a city at night, is going to walk from the Omni Hotel to the Main Street District or to the West End District. There's no way it's going to happen.
Not where it's located.
Dark, it's foreboding, and not where it's located, and not where nobody has stopped and thought, how is someone going to feel? And empathize, don't empathize with yourself. Empathize with the cheerleader moms and their young cheerleader daughters who are going to an event and are leaving and walking around this downtown. You have to create a place for them. There's no way anybody who does it, and it's not that it's dangerous, but at least not. Well, I'm a.
But even if it wasn't dangerous, it's empty. There's not much to do later at night, not late.
And you've got to connect. And actually, I was going to qualify that by saying, and this is about empathy. Like, it's not dangerous if you're a 5'11" guy who's lived in big cities pretty much your whole life, right? But it is for it is for other people probably. Right. If you're 5'1" and wearing high heels, you might rationally be concerned about your safety walking around there. Yeah. So that's it's a lack of attention to detail, and no amount of money is ever going to compensate. We've proven that. The places that we tend to love are places that our ancestors who were penniless and illiterate built. These towns, these people built these towns to nothing, but they had a set of principles that if we would have the humility to learn from them, to the extent that we do, we can still create these great places.
I mean, I would argue that all of the places that have been revitalized here in DFW started by those groups of people who were the illiterate or who weren't the rich. Right. And it just started at a grassroots level, and it just naturally morphed into something that was revitalized that had value that people wanted to go and visit. It wasn't because somebody dropped $1 billion somewhere and boom, everybody come. It took time, it took effort, but most of all, I think, like what you said, it had the principles, it had the character.
Right. Well, and when you're, I think that these places where you're talking about, we'll use examples in Dallas, such as, Lower Greenville or Deep Ellum or Bishop Arch or places like that. I mean, where these places were originally built according to these principles. You know, and you have places. I mean, it can be more complicated than that. You have a place like Uptown that was essentially, you know, that was built that way, but was essentially largely, if not entirely, wiped clean, or at least in parts of it were wiped pretty clean. But even then, the things that work are either intentionally or subconsciously part of these principles, and there's an attention to detail. So one of the examples that I'm fascinated with, I've probably talked about it on this podcast, so in some other episode, but maybe I haven't. Fort Worth, Sundance Square.
Yeah.
And you're pretty familiar with Sundance Square.
Yes, I'm a Texan. How dare I not be?
You know, on this side of the Metroplex, you'd be surprised. I started in this region in Fort Worth, and I was working for the city and lived downtown, so I have it. And I've done
intimate knowledge.
Yeah, I have an intimate. I have intimate knowledge.
I live in Rockwall. I live out east. So.
I know. I won't give you a hard time.
You hush. I love my town.
Okay. You actually
don't mess with Texas and don't mess with
Actually, you have a very good attention to detail that's been put into your downtown. You all have done a good job.
Yeah, we've invested and we've had, and it's because of the community members. I will say that downtown Rockwall, when I was a kid, was not what it is today, and it is what it is because people gave freely. They donated their time and they worked hard to make it what it is. So.
No, they've done a great job there. It's one of those it's one of those places, like most places I can go. And just because I've trained myself for this, and I can be like, okay, here's the 20 things that you could do, like I can just see it instantly. And you know, I'm not saying I don't see opportunities there, but I have to dig much more, which means, you know, you do have a good Main Street manager there, but it means that
Bethany Browning.
Yes, yeah.
I was on the board. I was on the Main Street.
Okay, all right.
Advisory board. So.
Okay.
When we talk Main Street, you know, very close to heart.
That's good. That's good. No, I mean. But it's you know, when you have someone who's good and there's enough persistence, the things that are the most obvious get done. And most cities do not do the things that are the most obvious, which is part of the reason why they're in a lot of trouble, because they've said, well, we'll wait to have a plan. Well, no, it's like, well, you can do these things now, and you can't wait. You need to take action. You need to do a plan. You need to know why you're doing things. It can be spinning your wheels, and it can hurt people's morale if you take action randomly, but know what your objectives are. And you know, rather than do the one thing that's going to make a 30% difference, start with the 30 things that can make a 1% difference. And I will say that Rockwall has certainly done that to my opinion. Look at you. You're so excited that I complimented.
I love Rockwall.
I know.
I love my town.
But Fort Worth, I love this story. So, you know, the Sundance Square area, for the listeners who are not familiar with Fort Worth, before I, you know, came into this region, I imagined that there was a river somewhere, and on one side of it is Dallas, and the other side is Fort Worth, and it's more akin to a 32-mile gulf. There's about 32 miles between the two cities, and they have definitely very different characters. You know, Fort Worth calls itself where the West begins, and it's, you know, cow town and proud of it. You know, a person wearing a cowboy hat would look, unless they can really pull it off, they'd look a little bit silly in Dallas, but in Fort Worth, they really wouldn't. It's much more of a Western town. It's much more of a cowboy town. And it's certainly somewhere that prides itself on having a very independent character. And prides itself on not being Dallas.
We get it.
Well, what? I'm a Dallasite. I'm just trying to. Is that? Am I saying too much?
Funky town and D-town.
I'm just trying to give.
Rivalry.
I'm giving the listeners a context. I don't need to be getting a hard time from you for doing that. They don't know. They don't have.
Clearly, the listeners know what side I lay on. I love Funky Town though. Like, if anybody ever comes to Texas and starts talking about any of our towns, we're gonna have a problem. So.
Okay, so this is like a sibling.
Yes.
This is like, see, I used to work for the city, so I have to, and there's misconceptions about Fort Worth on this side of the Metroplex, so I have to give listeners. And they have this, their downtown. Our downtown in Dallas has several pockets of activity and assets. Their downtown, pretty much, you have Sundance Square, and then you have a corridor that runs from it. But it's very high quality. It's very, very high quality, and it's one of those things where, I wrote out at one point on a Saturday night. I came up with a list of 20 things you could do on a Saturday night in downtown Fort Worth, and you can get a fancy meal, you can get a cocktail, you can get wine. There's there's theaters, there's also, I won't go through the entire list of things.
There's options.
Then you lose patience with me. But there's
because
lots.
You better treat Dallas the same way. Give the 20 things you can do in Dallas.
I can look if you were, I'm not Fort Worth. I can talk about Dallas.
Keep going. Let
me go on Fort Worth. I can talk encyclopedically on Dallas if that's what you need me to do. I'm rolling my eyes at you like this. All right. So that being the case, there's. And essentially, Sundance Square is owned by the Bass brothers, who are, literal multi-billionaires, and they've been fixing everything up since the 80s. What'd you say?
Bass Hall.
Yeah. Bass Hall, which is right downtown, and was a great kind. I won't talk about the acoustics of Bass Hall, because then you'll be like, well, why don't you say anything about Dallas? They have a great.
Look, we have the symphony, we have Winsphere Opera.
We have the largest arts district in the country. We have the largest daily operating farmers market.
Keep going.
Downtown. What'd you say?
Go ahead.
Okay, am I allowed to speak about Fort Worth? Okay, good.
Yes.
So the fascinating thing to me is that a lot of people are like, well, yeah, Fort Worth, you have a couple of billionaires who bought everything, so it's easy for you to succeed. Well, go around the country to places where billionaires or big corporations bought large chunks of the downtown in the 80s or in the 70s. Those places are wastelands. Those places are horrible.
Chicago, Detroit.
You look at in Detroit. Well, let's talk specifically. They have a whole, complex that basically GM and Ford tore down part of Detroit and built this whole complex that was basically meant to keep people out with very few entrances. It's the only part of downtown Detroit that isn't revitalizing, right? So it's like you pouring money into it without knowing what you're doing and without paying attention to details is counterproductive. It's destructive. What the Bass brothers did that was different than everybody else was they said, basically, we're going to think about walking around these blocks. We're going to go around the perimeter of a block. And what we want to do is when you walk around one block, both sides are going to be vibrant. It's going to be active. Every inch of it is going to be active. They had a ton of money. That helps, but it doesn't help if you don't have wisdom. And what they did was they focused on this very incremental approach, which is not a story that's being told. They focused on this very incremental approach that was, building by building, storefront by storefront, fix up the facades, bring it back to its former glory. It's, all of these retail spaces are well programmed, right, and is curated. If you talk to Johnny Campbell, I think he's still the who runs Sundance Square Inc., right? What he says is, we make money off of our retail and restaurants, but if we had to charge no rent for that, we would do that, because without our retail, without our restaurants, without this, these aren't necessarily small businesses, but without the businesses, some of which are small, some of which are curated, that line the storefront, none of our offices and none of our residential units would have value. Would have value. So when you have something that's centrally curated for the good of the whole, and you have this is a place management system that they have in place, but it is dealt with on this very micro scale, this very fine grained scale, and that's why it's been successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you have money and you have actual curation, when those two are combined. And if you look at it ultimately, downtown Dallas has in every way pretty much more assets than downtown Fort Worth. In terms
we just need to take it one bite at a time. We just need to take it one step at a time.
I mean, in the case of Fort Worth, I was involved with the Fort Worth. Gosh, it was the Fort Worth 2023 plan back in 2013. We're well closer to 2023 than we were.
Yeah.
The time goes fast. But in looking at Fort Worth, it has a very vibrant. The two areas that are technically considered the downtown are both about a square mile. And if you look at Fort Worth, they have a very, very vibrant core, and the goal is to expand it, and they've been doing that. In the case of Dallas, here's my fancy downtown Dallas map right here. Here it is. In the case of Dallas,
you would have the map.
Yeah. Downtown Dallas Inc. Doug Prude over there gave me that map when we were at a Congress for the New Urbanism North Texas board meeting. But this, if I wanted to play Vanna and point things out, the difference is that you have several pockets of activity that need to be better connected with each other. So I think it's a different dynamic. But if you look at what is in or near downtown Dallas, if you look at all of the ingredients, you've got all of the ingredients of a very, very, very fine dish. And we're starting to put them together, and these are just these are matters of what can be fairly modest connections. But I mean, you have the West End Historic District, which includes the JFK site, which includes new museums. The JFK site and the Holocaust Museum together would be a pretty sobering trip, but you also have not that it's not an important trip, but you also have the Museum of Illusions and several restaurants. There's a new park that's coming. What'd you say? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? I almost forgot to even bring that up. You have you're so smart. You think about Clyde Warren Park. This is one of the most successful large public spaces in the country, but it's not. And it's right next to this arts district. You're right next to Deep Ellum. You have, of course, the Main Street District. You have, the Pacific Plaza, which has come out, which is very successful. You have the largest daily farmers market in the country. You're right next to the Deep Ellum neighborhood. You're right next to the Uptown neighborhood. You have
now we just need to connect
it center with the Cedars.
Make it walkable.
Yeah.
Have some public transit that's actually functioning and well kept. And bada bing, bada boom. It's like
fix that West End Station area. We've got to address the issues there. I mean, there's a lot of work to do, but I think that the right ideas are being pursued, and I think it's being done. And that's not something I would have always said, but I have to admit that it's being done now, and I have to admit that a lot of the, I see a lot of the right steps. Over the last few years, really being done very aggressively.
There's hope.
There is hope, and even so there's 4 parks coming up. We had this Pacific Plaza, which I will admit I thought there was at least as good of a chance as that it wouldn't work as it would. That's how skeptical I am, but it did. But if you look at Clyde Warren Park, I don't think anybody knew how successful Clyde Warren Park would be.
But that also shows how much people value and want open space. They do want green. Right. They do want walkable. They want it. And if we provide it, and if we plan it out and put it in the right location, people will come.
I thought the lesson from Clyde Warren Park is that we should have deck parks everywhere in the city.
Oh Lord.
No, that's what some people got out of it. We need more deck parks. No,
let's not do that.
That's not the point.
That's a little too much.
But here's the real or one of the real lessons. Clyde Warren Park was a very expensive enterprise. For people who aren't familiar with it, they basically covered part of a highway, decked a highway, and made this into this park that's been very successful. And sometimes people have come to me and said, "See, like these big, huge investments can work," and they certainly can. And we see in the case of Clyde Warren Park, it certainly did. But let me say
Park was a huge investment.
Well, let me if I may say my piece, and then we can talk about Fair Park all day if we want. I spent, you may know that I spent a lot of time on Fair Park, so but
I did too.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's right, you did.
We're gonna compare notes.
Okay. And you were part of the team that for UTA.
Yeah.
Okay. We can compare notes. This is good.
Yeah.
But
that'll be a next conversation.
Yes. Yeah. We both were hired by the same organization, and both were independently involved in proposals to shrink the footprint of the State Fair of Texas. Is essentially hired by the same person. Okay, where were we? Oh, so here's the thing, is it's also true that there's about 15 things to do at Clyde Warren Park. You've got stuff for children, you've got stuff to read, you've got games, you can play ping pong, you have concerts, you can borrow a chess set or a checker set. Without that, I don't think the whole thing would have worked. I think you would have just basically had an empty, and you have food trucks and things like that. So yes, the big investments can work, certainly. I have yet to see a big investment that's worked in the absence of attention to detail, in the absence of if you're going to do going back to the one thing that makes a 30% difference, doing the 30 things that make 1% difference can work on their own in isolation. Doing the one thing that makes a 30% difference, but only doing that, is not going to work. It's not going to help you to create great places. So you have to pay attention, in my opinion, to detail. And that especially now, it's always been true. But you have a situation now, I mean, cities they're not going to have the budget to do this, and they have really important things to do. They really, they're going to have some very basic needs to be taken care of. I mean, people are going to get evicted from their houses. People are going to have food insecurity issues. People are going to have long-term employment challenges if they happen to be graduating at the wrong time. It's going to affect them for a long, long time. Cities are going to have things to do, and if the answer is the status quo, this is not going to work, and the councils are going to see this. Yeah. The citizens are going to see this. Like it's I used to always say, imagine your favorite downtown or your favorite neighborhood, but take away 8 of the 10 best businesses, right? Like it would be death, even it's 5. Death. Now suicide. You're going to see that, and you're going to see places that have spent millions and millions of dollars on their downtown, but have decided that was a substitute for wiped out because their small businesses are wiped out. Yeah. And that's going to be obvious to a lot of people. I mean, if they're pursuing the status quo and ignoring these blatantly obvious things, I think that even the citizens will see this. And to me, it's like on our podcast recently, we were talking to this economic development consultant, Emily Brown, based out of Pittsburgh. She's like about the integration of economic development and placemaking and incremental development and all that sort of stuff. She was, oh shoot, I lost my thread. I forget exactly where I was. I lost my thread.
You're fine. It's okay because I think our time is wrapping up too. So what we'll do is this. Keep it in mind, and we're going to have another get together. We're going to have another episode after this one. We're going to discuss Fair Park, and we're going to discuss Miss Browning, and we're going to go in.
Okay, we'll have I have no idea why my brain just froze. I think I realized how I'm over, one of the things I think is that it's probably fundamentally unnatural to be especially productive during a pandemic.
Right.
Which is I think
we're seeing that now.
Yeah. So it's just
Thank
just
you
dead.
for joining me, though.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes.
Good stuff.
We'll have a separate.
Oh, thank you. We'll have a separate conversation about Fair Park, and
that's going to be a good one.
When you unleash your thesis upon the world, we'll have to have a podcast discussion.
On my dissertation?
Yeah, that's on your dissertation. I think your dissertation might actually be one of the rare ones that people actually read.
Oh, Lord, please, let's not. I'm scared of that now, because what people read, they like to critique, and I don't know if I can handle all the critique after suffering 7 years.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. But I think you'll have a thick skin about it. All right, thank you.